Hey everyone, this is the video conference for Elementary Hebrew 1, Week 5. And I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I just sent out the invitation, so we'll probably have some people pop in while I'm going. And I can pause at that point, that's fine. But unfortunately, my undergrad Hebrew video conference ran a little long, and so that's why I'm late getting started today. But we'll go ahead and jump in here to Furtado's exercises from last week. And that way, I can knock some of this out while we wait for people to join, and hopefully I don't run overtime like I did in the previous one. So what we were looking at last time was practicing these paradigm forms that we learned last week, which was for the Qal Perfect. And I would recommend for you, let me just all to fit on one page. What am I doing wrong? That's a big jump. Okay, so it's helpful to be able to sort of rattle these off, memorize them to the point where you've got a rhythm for them. So what my teacher did when I was going through Hebrew is we read through them all to a particular rhythm in the class several times so that our minds sort of developed an anticipation for the different forms, okay? If you can memorize that it goes 3ms, then 3fs, then 2ms, then 2fs, then 1cs, then 3cp, then 2mp, then 2fp, then 1cp, then you can kind of connect each form with it. Obviously, it's helpful to be able to write these out correctly with the vowels and everything, but you're not actually going to be required to do that in this course. Remember, this is a Hebrew reading course. We're asking you to learn how to read Hebrew, not necessarily how to write Hebrew. And so you're not going to have to necessarily produce the Qal Perfect 2FS form of Qal and know that, you've got two shavas at the end, or the 3FS form of Qal where you have a shava under the second root letter, that sort of a thing. You're not going to be asked to produce these forms, so focus first on recognizing them. If we were to read through here, the particular sort of cadence or rhythm that I memorize these by, you want to repeat this enough to where you can go through it pretty quickly. So let me read through these slowly, and then we'll kind of speed it up to the rhythm that I'm used to. I'll read through it slowly just to solidify the pronunciation, and then as we go quicker, you'll hopefully kind of pick up on the rhythm. The rhythm differs between the singular and the plural, but the idea is to get a rhythm that matches the syllables, and that's what's going to help you remember it. So we have katal, katala, katalta, katalt, katalti, katalu, kataltem, katalten, katalnu. And you can hear when I get into the plural, I'm going pretty straight through. Katalu, kataltem, katalten, katalnu. Katalu, kataltem, katalten, katalnu. I'm whatever syllable is accented in the form, that syllable is on a downbeat, okay? And that's what kind of establishes the rhythm for you. So again, at the top, a little bit different rhythm. Katal, katala, katalta, katalt, katalti. The singular is a little bit trickier because the accent shifts around in the singular, but that's why it sounds different. So, katal, katala, katalta, katalt, katalti. Katalu, kataltem, katalten, katalnu. And then all the way through you would go. Katal, katala, katalta, katalt, katalti. Katalu, kataltem, katalten, katalnu. Eventually you want to get that fast with it. Now, I've been reading Hebrew for a long time, so I have this paradigm memorized. I know the rhythm really well. You're not going to say it that fast at the beginning. You might not say it that fast this semester. That's fine. But just work on developing, even if it's just your own rhythm. I recommend that you figure out which syllable has the accent. So let's go through it one more time so you can pinpoint the accent. I'll emphasize the accented syllable. You have katal, katal, katala, katalta, katalt, katalti. Notice that in katalta, and catalti. Those two, the accent is not on the final syllable. In catal and catala and catalt, those, the accent is on the final syllable. But in catalta and catalti, those accents have shifted. They are on the R2 syllable. All right, so make sure that when you're doing that sort of rhythm, that the accent marked syllable, the accented syllable, is on a downbeat. That will help you establish the rhythm there. Catal, catala, catalta, catalt, catalti. Catalu, cataltem, catalten, catalnu. All right. If you can go through those, that will help you memorize them well and keep them in your head. Let's take a look at the practice exercises, starting with section B here. I'm going to make the print bigger. All right, so going through here, and I'll probably put up sort of either maybe something in the vocabulary spreadsheet on a different tab, or maybe even a separate video where I walk you through sort of a process for parsing, kind of a methodology. What are the steps that you go through? And these may seem a little silly to go through all these steps when you can just look at the verb and recognize, you immediately know how to parse it, but it won't always be so easy. It won't always be so self-evident, so apparent right off the bat when we get into some of the weak verbs. So if you can establish the pattern now of asking some questions to guide you through your parsing, I think that will pay off when we hit the weak verbs later on. So, what is this process? Let me go ahead and pull up a Word document. And you can ignore that for now. All right, so there we go. So, question one, or step one. Let's just say step one. How many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? That's, for the most part, going to be, the answer to that is going to be 3, okay? We'll learn about some verbs later on that might seem to have only 2 letters, but technically those have a vowel letter. So they will have a hirik yod or a holam vav. They will still have a letter in there representing a vowel. So the answer is still true. Because a vowel letter is a letter, Hebrew verbal roots have 3 letters. How many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? 3. Step 2. How many letters does my word have? And you might just say my verb because we're talking about verbs here. How many letters does my verb have? Number 1, well, that's pretty easy. It has 3. I'm not going to put the answer here because this will always change. This should not change. So how many letters does my verb have? 3. Oh, great. Then I probably am looking right at my root. I probably don't have anything added to it, any suffixes in the case of the Qal Perfect. And that is the case here. We've memorized shalach as the Qal Perfect 3ms form of the root for send or to send, shalach, shin lamed chet. So you can just put shin lamed chet in your root column. You don't need to add these vowels here. These vowels indicate specifically the Qal Perfect 3ms form. So the vowels aren't really part of the root. The vowels are part of the conjugated Qal Perfect 3ms form. All right, so that was pretty simple. I get to step 2 and I ask how many letters does my verb have? Well, if 3, then you probably are looking at the root. Oh boy. Let's go a little bit. Oh, how about we just do this? Let's go down to 16. That should be big enough. And if it's not, we can always zoom. All right. So step 2, if the answer is 3, then you're probably looking at the root, and you can go ahead and jot it down. If more than 3, then you probably have an, in parentheses, affixes. So you probably have either an affix or multiple affixes. What in the world is an affix? Well, an affix is the broader category into which we would categorize prefixes, suffixes, and even infixes. A prefix comes before the word, it's added to the beginning of a word. A suffix comes after a word, it's added to the end of a word. And an infix is inserted into the middle of a word. Prefixes, suffixes, and infixes are all affixes. And affixes are a big part of how we identify a verb and parse it in Hebrew. So we get to step 2. We already know that Hebrew verbal roots have 3 letters. If my verb has more than 3, then I'm probably looking at a conjugated form that has either suffixes, prefixes, or infixes. Now in the Qal Perfect, which is the only conjugation that we've learned so far, we only have suffixes. We don't have prefixes and we don't have infixes. So if I have more than 3, then I probably have a suffix. Step 3. I like to start with suffixes. I find that they're usually the easiest to locate. So step 3, and frankly, if you're at if 3, you're probably looking at the root. That's kind of the end of the process for that. But if more than 3, you probably have an affix. Go to step 3, or we'll just say go to S3. All right, step 3. Start with suffixes. All right, so let's look at number 2. How many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? 3. How many letters does my verb have? Well, mine has 4. And you know what? Let's actually just cover up the vowels because we don't even need those right now. This will hopefully make your life a lot easier because if you don't have to worry about the vowels, then you don't have more stuff to confuse you. All right, so how many letters does my verb have? Mine has 4 letters. Okay, I've got a lamed, a kof, a chet, and a hey. All right, well, if it's more than 3, which 4 is, by the way, then you probably have a, in the Qal Perfect, suffix. Go to step 3. Start with the suffixes. Go to the end of the word. Okay, so let's ask this question. In this particular one, the question's going to differ depending on the suffix that you're looking at. Let's just move all this up here. In this particular one, what forms, or we could say conjugations of a verb, have a hey suffix? All right, now, if we're looking at a different suffix, we'll have to put something else there, but we're looking at a hey suffix, so what does the hey suffix tell us? What forms of the Qal Perfect verb have a hey suffix? Well, that's where you need to have your paradigm chart remembered. And in that particular case, it's going to be the Qal Perfect, you can say Qal Perfect 3FS, okay? That is the form that's going to have a comma's hey ending. So now we can, step 5, remove that suffix. And what would we be left with? We would be left with lamed, kof, chet. Is lamed, kof, chet a verbal root that we are familiar with? Yeah, we learned that as the verbal root for the idea of capturing or taking or seizing, something like that. So this then would be our verbal root. We can fill out our root category or our root column. But the comma's hey ending tells us all the rest of this information. Comma's hey indicates Qal Perfect 3FS. All right, so that is basically the idea here but with this process is if you can walk through a set of questions, that will help you narrow down the possibilities. And the most important part is it will help you locate the root of the verb, which, if you take just a moment and go to, oh boy, I don't want this up. I don't want the gradebook up. Let's do a uh, different approach here. If you go into our course page, click on syllabus, go to course objectives. Oh, how about that? It's not even in the objectives. Maybe it's in semester 2. But the idea is what we usually call root locating or root identifying is a big part of what this course is. Oh boy. All right, we're going to have to take that out of the recording there. Um, Locating the root of a Hebrew verb is a big part of what we're trying to teach you in this course. And so these steps, I'll kind of post this in a separate document or maybe make a separate video about it. I think that if you can ask yourself these questions, it will walk you through the process of identifying your verbal root and then parsing it out. It's going to be pretty intuitive up front because you've memorized your paradigm, but when we get down here into the weak verbs, that's when a process like this will be more helpful. All right, so introduce that. We have David with us now. So David, I want to, before I just jump into reviewing Furtado's exercises from last week, I want to prioritize any questions or topics or concepts or exercises that you might have off the top of your head that you'd like to focus on. If you don't have any, that's fine. We'll just continue on. But I want to make sure we make time for any specific questions you might have. And you're still muted there.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. There we go.
Yeah, I'm kind of coming in here with my hair on fire. I've been involved in a Sunday school work project, and so I'm late, and I'm sorry. I apologize for that, but I couldn't get away.
I actually started the conference late, so I was late too.
Okay, well, good. Um, One of the things I guess I think you were alluding to it is trying to figure out what is the root of the verb because there's so many moving parts to a verb that how do you what's the best way to find the actual lexical meaning of the word, and so you're heading in the right direction for my concerns.
Yeah, well then let's continue to apply this to these other examples here and just kind of see it play out, because again, all we've learned so far as verbs go is we've learned one specific conjugation. That is the Qal Perfect conjugation. Again, Qal refers to the pattern. There are 7 of these patterns that we're going to learn in Hebrew 1 and 2. Perfect refers to the conjugation. There's something like another 6 or so of those that we'll learn. But right now, Qal just means that the verb is active. That means that the subject is actually performing the verb. And it means, I'm running out of room here, but let's just say Qal also means that we're looking at simple action, which doesn't mean anything right now because we don't have anything to compare it to, but it's not, for example, causative. It's not, for example, necessarily like repetitive or something like that. It's active and it is completed action. All right, and so the best way to translate active completed action in English, if we're talking about some action that is completed, we usually use the past tense. So we can use the simple past tense like he ate, or we could use something like the past perfect, well, what we call the perfect tense, he has eaten. Man, there really isn't a lot of room here. So he ate, he has eaten, or we could do something even like the what's called the pluperfect or the past perfect, something like he had eaten, and I won't have room there for, but he had eaten. All of those communicate action that is completed. So that's the basic idea with the Qal Perfect. It's active, That means that the subject is actually doing it. It's not like I was eaten, that would be passive, but the subject is doing the action, I ate. And of course, it's completed, so we often use the past tense. That's the only thing we've learned so far. And in the Qal Perfect, the particular way that Hebrew designates action as simple and completed is by adding certain suffixes to the verbal root. So for the third masculine singular, it doesn't add anything. It just takes the root and it applies this vowel pattern of kametz patach. And that expresses the action of sending specifically as completed, so sent, and then this vowel pattern here indicates that it is a third person masculine singular subject doing that. So he sent. That's kind of how that information gets encoded. If that subject is feminine, then Hebrew will add a kametz hey to the end. Now, I talked about this in my undergrad video. For the next couple minutes, nothing I'm saying is information that you need to know or remember. But some students have questions about, well, why in the world did we go from kametz patach to now when we add the kametz hey, we get kametz shava? Why does the patach change into a shava? That just has to do with the fact that when you add the kametz hey to the end, you're actually adding a new syllable to the Hebrew word. And Hebrew doesn't like to get a lot of syllables in a word, and so it's going to try to shorten the word a little bit so it doesn't get too big. And one of the ways it does that is by reducing the short patach into a vocal shava. That's usually what happens when you add a vowel suffix. So kametz hey here is a vowel suffix. And because it's a vowel, you can reduce this, what I call the R2 vowel, which means it's the second root letter. R stands for root, 2 stands for second. Second root letter is kof. The second root vowel is the shava here. So I call this the R2 vowel. By reducing the R2 vowel from patach to shava, you get a little bit more, you kind of compensate for the fact that you've added this full vowel over here, because remember the shava, this is kind of like a half vowel. It's not really a full vowel. So that's one way it does it. When you add a vocalic suffix or a vowel suffix like kametz hey, one of the ways that Hebrew kind of breaks up the word that's really big now is it reduces the R2 vowel. When you add a consonant suffix like a tav kametz, well, that's less flexible. And so Hebrew can't really reduce this syllable because the consonant is a little bit more rigid than a vowel. And so what it's going to do to break up the word is, instead of reducing something, it's just going to shift the accent. Now, Furtado doesn't really show you how these forms get accented in the paradigm chart. Let me pull that up here. He just shows you what the suffixes are, but he doesn't show you that not every form here is accented on the final syllable. In Hebrew, the default is for a word to be accented on the final syllable. And so katal, that's accented on the final syllable. Ka tala is accented on the final syllable. But when you get these consonantal suffixes, where the suffix begins with a consonant, what it's going to do to try to break up the word is it's a little harder to say ka tal ta than it is to say katal ta. If you keep the accent at the end, it's a little bit harder to say, but if you move that accent over here, it's easier to say katalta than it is to say katalta. All right, and so that's what Hebrew does. The accent shifts over here when you have this consonantal suffix. And so for katalta, katalt, and katalti, and even katalnu, this is another consonant suffix. For those, the accent is on the second to last syllable instead of the final syllable. And then there's one other change that takes place. when you've got this consonantal suffix that's actually heavy. It's got two letters in it, not just a letter and a vowel, but two full consonants. Well, that's a different beast altogether. That kind of it's a really heavy suffix. It weighs down the end, and so it kind of pulls some of the vowel strength from the beginning, and you get a reduction in the first root letter. So that's what this right. Let me pull this back up here. That's what I was writing up here at the top was these vowel changes that happen to the root. There's kind of three different vowel changes that might happen. If you have no suffix at all, there's no vowel change. If you have a vocalic suffix, that means your suffix is a vowel, then this second root letter is reduced to a schwa. If you have a consonant suffix, then that's where they shift the accent to the second to last syllable. And then the final one is when you have a consonantal suffix that's closed, what we call a heavy suffix. That's when you reduce the first root letter vowel. All right, and so that's kind of what's going on with all of these vowel changes, which can sometimes confuse students. But what I like to say is when you're looking at an actual word, so let's go back here to our parsings. I say don't even look at the vowels. Don't even pay attention to them at first. Just look at your letters. Cover up the vowels if you have to. Ask yourself first, how many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? The answer is going to be 3 here. And then ask yourself, how many letters does my verb have? Mine has 4. Okay? Let's go to one that we haven't done yet, because I just went through these. Let's come down here to number 4. All right, we're going to cover up the vowels. We're not even going to pay attention to them. We're going to ask, how many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? It's supposed to have 3. How many do I have? I have 5. Well, if it's more than 3, you're probably looking at, in the case of the Qal Perfect, a suffix. So in that case, go to step 3. Step 3, start with your suffixes at the end of the word and ask yourself, what form of the, in this case, Qal Perfect, what verb form adds a mem to the end? And we don't have any that add just a mem, but we do have one that adds a tav segel mem. In the Qal Perfect 2MP form, we get this tem suffix. All right, well, we just so happen to have a tav segel mem here. So let's take that off. Make this a little bit shorter here, and I'll take that off. What we're left with after we take that suffix off is our root, zachar. So we can go ahead and jot down Zayin Kaf Resh as our root over here. And then this part, the suffix, that tells us all of this information. The tem tells us that it's Qal Perfect. It also tells us that it is second person, and it tells us that it's masculine plural. So this suffix itself tells us everything we need to know about the parsing, and then when we take it off, we're left with the root. So that answers for us everything that we're asked to give in the parsing. The tem suffix tells us Qal Perfect 2MP, and then once we take that off, we're left with our root, which is zachar. So you'll notice that you're probably fighting an intuition when you come to a vowel, or I'm sorry, when you come to a verb, you're gonna find yourself first looking for the root. Don't do that. Don't worry about the root at first. Don't look for the root first. Look for the in the Qal Perfect, look for the suffixes first. Because once you find your suffix, you'll know what your root is by taking the suffix off. But a lot of times people will come to something like this and they'll say, wow, shen, mem, ayin, nun, shurik. What's the root? Is it ayin, nun, shurik? Is it mem, ayin, nun? Is it shen, mem, ayin? Don't look for the root first. Look for your suffix first. And that way you can always start at the end And you can kind of work your way backwards. So let's do that here in number 5. How many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? 3. How many do I have? I have 5 again. So I've obviously got something added to the root. I'm going to start at the end. Start with my suffix. What conjugations do I know of that add a shurik to the end? Well, there's 2. One is just a shurik. That's the Qal Perfect 3CP. And that is, well, I just told you, I was going to say that indicates Qal Perfect 3CP. But if that's my suffix and I take it off, I'm still left with 4 letters, not 3. So this would not be my root. That means that there must be more to my suffix than just the shurik. So what about the noon shurik? What conjugations do I have that add a noon shurik? Well, that's the other one of the 2 that have a shurik. So one is just a shurik. The other one that has a shurik is a noon shurik, the new suffix. And new suffix, if that's what I have, which is what I have, that indicates Qal Perfect 1CP. And now that I've taken the noon shurik off, what I have left is my root, Shema. So I always say it's easier to start by looking for your suffix than to start by looking for your root. I know you want to find the root first, but start by looking for your suffix, and then whatever's left will probably be your root. So I put my root here, shen, mem, ayin, and I've got my suffix, noon shurik. That tells me that it is Qal Perfect 1CP, and I've got all the info that I need there. Any questions about that? Does that make sense?
Yes, uh, that makes sense. What I'm wanting though is once you've got that root, how do you know which lexical meaning the word is? Because you could have any number of vowels attached to that root, correct?
Well, it is correct. Here's what I would say is at this point, um, the letters are going to tell you 90% of what you need to know. So if we cover up the vowels and we just look at the consonantal letters, we see our new suffix, so we take that off. We see our root, shen, mem, ayin, and we ask ourselves, have I seen shin, mem, ayin as a root? Now, you may not recognize this without looking at the vowels, okay? You may have to look at the vowels for it to click for you, but this is a good idea when you're learning Hebrew and you're learning Hebrew vocabulary, is pay attention first to the consonant letters and then note the vowel letters, because ideally you would be able to pick out shin, mem, ayin as the root that means hear or listen to. Now, when we put the when we put the kametz patach on there without a suffix, it means he heard. When we put the kametz patach on there with the new suffix, it means we heard, 1CP. So the way that you get to the translation of this verb would be to say, okay, I've got shin, mem, ayin. That is the verbal root shema, which, because I know my vocabulary, I know that root means shema in the 3CP or in the 3MS form means he heard. So I could probably put like heard here is the meaning of the verb. But who heard? Is it he heard? Is it they heard? Is it she heard? Well, because I've got the new suffix, I know that it is 1CP. So I have to ask myself, what is my English first person pronoun? Well, I have 2 in English. I have I and I have we. Which one of those is plural? In English, we don't distinguish in the first person, neither does Hebrew, between masculine and feminine. but I've got I and I've got we as first person pronouns. Well, which one's plural? It's we. So we would translate this as we heard because we have a first person plural subject, which would be we, and then we have the meaning of Shema, which is heard. Does that answer the question, or is there still a question about how to translate that?
Well, I think when we've known a limited number of three-letter roots,
Right.
it's probably going to be easy. But I guess as the vocabulary expands and you have more three-letter roots using the same three letters, and that's where it's going to get harder to figure out.
Yeah, and there are situations where you may have two different verbs in Hebrew, but the roots, by coincidence, are identical. Um, I'm trying to think of some examples off the top of my head. I think that one example would be, and I can't remember which example it is. So it's either Resh Ayin or it's Resh Ayin Hey. I think it's Resh Ayin Hey. Resh Ayin means like to be bad or disastrous or something like that. Resh Ayin Hey can mean either. Let me just go ahead and look it up here. Where is. Here we go. Let me type this in. Resh. Oops. There we go. Oh boy. Resh Ayin Hey. There we go. Okay. So the first meaning that Resh Ayin Hey can have is to shepherd. But there's also a second meaning it can have, which is to associate with. Ra'ah could mean to keep company with someone, something like that, to be mixed up with someone, to be connected with someone. Or it could mean in this case, it's not a verb, it's an adjective. And it just is the adjective form of wicked or evil. Okay? So here is one root that could have two very different meanings. I don't want to say it's rare that that happens, because certainly this does happen, but the vast majority of your roots will be distinct. They will be a distinct three-letter combination. So, for example, let's just pick a random one with Samek. Here we go. Samek Beit Lamed. I don't even know what this means. This isn't a frequent enough root for me to have memorized. But if I come here, I see that it means in the Qal Perfect, it means he carried, Qal Perfect 3MS. Or it could mean he supported, but the meanings are connected. If I scroll down, I don't get another, I don't have that Roman numeral 1 here, meaning the first meaning versus the second meaning. There's only one root, there's only one meaning for this root. The question is, there may be one that's like, for example, sin bait lamed, and it would sound the same, but it would be spelled different. There's also the issue of when you get done with first year Hebrew, you're going to have memorized something like 300 to 400 vocabulary words, but there are thousands of Hebrew words in the Old Testament. So you're obviously not going to memorize all of them. In that case, what you would do is once you get your root, so whether that's resh, ayin hey, or that's shin, mem, ayin, whatever that root is, then you can just go into your lexicon and you can look up, let's do shin, mem, ayin. And you'll see when you go there, okay, here is that root. I'll scroll down to where I get the first meaning, to hear. Okay, so certainly you're not going to memorize all of the Hebrew verbal roots. And if you run into a root that you have not memorized, or honestly that you've forgotten and you're not taking a quiz, then you just go to your lexicon and look up that root and it will give you the meaning there. So we certainly don't expect you to memorize every single Hebrew verbal root. Once you're able to locate that root, that's when you can go to your lexicon to find out what the lexical meaning is, and then you can figure out what pronoun you're supposed to use based on the parsing. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You bet. Okay, I see Seth has joined us. Seth, do you have any questions or topics that you want to go over? I want to prioritize those. Otherwise, we can continue through the Furtado exercises, but I want to make sure that I get a chance to answer any questions you have.
No, to be honest, I haven't interacted with this week's material a whole lot so far in the week. So,
all right, sounds good. Well, we're going over last week's parsings here, and I've kind of brought up sort of, I don't know, um, call it a what's the word I'm looking for? Not a method, like a process. That's what I'm trying to think of. A process of how to address these. For a lot of these, you're going to look at shalach, and you're probably going to recognize that as Qal Perfect 3MS because that's the form that you memorized in your vocabulary. You get to la kacha. Well, that's pretty easy to tell. Comets hey ending. This is 3FS. So a lot of these you're going to probably, after a little bit of practice, recognize immediately. You're not going to have to go through all these steps. But I'm sharing these steps with you now because when we get to weak verbs, these are the irregular verbs. We're going to add some steps to this process. But my hope is that you will already sort of have the basic structure of this process programmed into your brain so that when we add a couple steps, it'll be really intuitive and it'll be much easier for you to recognize these irregular forms. So basically what we've been doing here is going through the parsing and the practice and kind of applying these steps to the roots. So let's do one more here. Let's take this process. And again, another thing I've been doing is kind of covering up the vowels because there can be some questions about, well, why does this vowel change? Why do we get a shavah here? Why do these vowels keep changing? Don't worry about it. There are reasons. You don't need to know them. We're not going to ask you to know what the reasons are. If you have a brain like mine that is very analytical, it may drive you crazy not knowing. And so I might do a separate video kind of going through an explanation of why the changes happen that do. But just ignore them for the beginning part. When you come to a verb, just kind of cover up the vowels. Just look at the letters. Ask yourself, how many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? 3. How many do I have? I have kaf, tav, beit, tav, yod. So I have 5 letters here. Well, if you got more than 3, then you probably have a suffix in the Qal Perfect. We talked about what an affix is. That includes prefixes and infixes, but here we have a suffix. So go to step 3. We're going to start with our suffixes, which means we're going to start at the end of the word. What conjugation have I seen that adds a yod to the end? Well, I saw one, and it doesn't just add a yod to the end, it adds a tav hirik yod. Well, turns out that's what I have. Great. Okay. So what was that? What form was that added the tav hirik yod? Well, if you've memorized your paradigm, you know that it goes katal, katala, katalta, katalt, katalti. That T suffix, that's the 1CS. All right, so right now I know it's Qal Perfect 1CS. I've already answered most of this. Now I just need to figure out what the root is. Again, don't start your parsing by looking for the root. It's going to be harder that way. Start your parsing by looking for the suffix, or when we get to the imperfect, by looking for the prefix. But start by looking for the suffix, because once you've found the suffix, all you have to do is take the suffix off, and you've got your root. So now I can write katav, kaf, tav, beit as my root. What does the root katav mean? Well, it means right or to write. In the Qal Perfect 3MS, it means he wrote. But what does it mean in the Qal Perfect 1CS? Because that's the form I have here. Well, in the Qal Perfect 1CS, it doesn't mean he wrote, it means I wrote. And so if I needed to translate it, I could do that. I just write in he wrote. We'll do one more here. I'm going to cover up the vowels. I'm going to ask myself, how many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? 3. How many do I have? I have 5 again. Okay, so I've got extra. All right, so let's start at the end. What can I take off here? What forms have I learned that add a noon to the end? Well, I didn't learn any that add just a noon, but I did learn one that adds a tav segel noon, and that is the Qal Perfect 2FP. All right, so if this is the Qal Perfect 2FP, then all I have to do is take that suffix off, and I'm left with my root here, batach. Now, never mind the fact that I've got a shavah here, and that wasn't part of the form I memorized. I'm just looking at the letters right now. Batach. Have I learned a vocabulary word that has a bait, tet, chet? And batach, if I know my vocabulary, and even if I don't, if I'm not taking a quiz, I can go look up bait, tet, chet in my lexicon. And there I will find that this root means trust or to trust. In the Qal Perfect 3FS, or I'm sorry, 3MS, and I'll go ahead and write in bait, tet, chet here. You don't have to add the vowels in the root, just put the letters there. In the Qal Perfect 3MS, batach means he trusted. But what does it mean in the Qal Perfect 2FP? Well, 2FP means second person, that's you. It means feminine. We still use you for feminine in English. It means plural. Well, we still use you, so it means you trusted. Pretty straightforward there. And that's what you can see when you get down here into these. Now we're talking about the meaning. So let's cover this up and we'll scroll down a few. Let's look at number 5. Again, number 4 is for up here. Look at 5. Lakachtem. Lakachtem. How many letters does a Hebrew verbal root have? 3. How many do I have? I have 5. So what's extra? Well, let's start at the end. If I take off the mem, I've still got 4 letters. That's not enough. I still got to take something else off to get back to 3. So let's take off the mem and the tav. If I take that off, what suffix? Let me make this a little bit narrower here. If I take off the, oh boy, there we go. If I take off the tem, what does the tem signify? Where do I see, what form uses tem? This is the Qal Perfect 2MP. If I take that off, I'm left with lakach. Well, lakach I learned as he took, or he captured, or he seized in the Qal Perfect 3MS. But it's not 3MS, it's 2MP. So again, it's not he took, it's you, masculine plural, took. And so that's how we kind of apply this methodology through here. And we get these. Now, this one here, we're just applying the pronouns as well. So we're matching, oh no, these are just verbless clauses. Okay, well, that's more of what we had in lesson 5. So anyways, this little chart here, or this little process, is going to help you step by step. What do I need to look at in order to get back to my root and my suffix so that I can then take that information and apply it to my translation? All right. Any questions about that? Anything else? Okay. Well, I know that I know you guys both jumped in late, but I actually got started late. I got started about 10 minutes late, but I'm at the end here. So if you do have any other questions, send them to me. Like I said, I'm going to try to put either a video together or at least kind of put these steps into a graphic that you can kind of refer to. Because, like I said, as we get to the weak roots, this will be very important in helping you speed up your parsing. So if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and shut it down, and we'll see you guys next time.